Hey, what's up? My name is JM Chaley and welcome to my channel. This week I want to talk about some book recommendations for the writing craft. This video, by the way, was inspired by A.M. Molloy on her channel because she gave a similar list and I thought, that's a great idea. That's some good advice. What are the books that I've read that have helped me in my craft? So I'm going to link A.M. Molloy's video up here. Her channel is great. I love she'll drive around South Korea, and talk about book reviews and just the craft of writing and her own works. Her book South, which is awesome. It's a LGBTQ plus love story. Got me right in the feels. Oh my God. She kind of gave me the idea for this video with her own video about book recommendations, and I want to do the same with my recommendations. And indeed, we share some similar titles for sure. Now, the general disclaimer here is that your mileage may vary. Not everyone writes the same way. In fact, pantsers may have a hard time with some of these books because there's a lot of planning that goes into structuring your story based on what these books are talking about, right? It's not just outlining, it's making scene cards and all this kind of stuff that pantsers kind of go, from, and that's okay. So take from this list what you will, and if it helps you, great. If it's not applicable to you, don't try to shoehorn it in. Don't change what's working for you. But here's a list of books that have worked for me. So the first book is Saves the Cat Writes, a novel by Jessica Brody. Now, this book is actually based off the original book, which is just simply called Saves the Cat, or Saves the Cat Writes a Story. I forget what it is, but it was basically a book to help screenwriters. Because the idea is, if you're writing a movie, movies tend to have these consistent story beats to them throughout all three acts, and you can map out your story with these beats. And what Jessica Brody did was say, well, that's the same of novels and probably any kind of story medium, right? So it's the same beats applied specifically to novels. And I think there's like 16 beats depending on, broken out into each of the three acts. And these are like a guide to help you navigate through your story. Did I make sure I did this? Did I make sure I did this? Did I make sure I did this? Right? A good example is Chekhov's gun, right? You know that the gun's going to fire in the third act. Did you remember to show it in the first act, right? These are story beats that kind of blend together, link together, drive your story forward. And when the reader reads them, it's like music. They're notes that go together. They sound right. They feel right. Nothing feels disjointed because you're following sort of this recipe, this pattern that just makes sense. The next book is Story Genius by Lisa Cron. This is similar to Saves the Cat Writes, a novel, except what this does, instead of story beats, it breaks everything up into scenes, and you build these scene cards. It's kind of the same, but it's a new way to kind of look at it. And it goes in a little bit more in depth for each beat because you're going into different scenes. Because a single story beat could have multiple scenes in it. And really what you're doing with Story Genius is breaking things down in a more granular level. Every single scene, flesh it out, and build these story cards. Now, for me, I'm a plotter. I write outlines and things like that. Writing out a story card for every single scene was a lot of work. And I don't think that's for me, but the way Lisa Cron sort of describes the story flow, you almost, and I don't want to say to discard the scene cards, but if they're not working for you, that's okay. It's still worth reading the book because she describes sort of the science behind the storytelling, you know, what your expectation is. And again, it's like music. You know, you hear these certain notes. There's only certain notes that are going to be able to follow it and sound right. And if you're not hitting those notes correctly, it's going to sound wrong. We've all had stories. We've all heard stories or read stories or saw a movie where it just kind of went, meow, you know, and you're like, nah, I didn't like that ending. Or I didn't like that they did this, right? They hit a bad note. This helps you to avoid hitting those bad notes and makes sense of sort of the science. You know, she refers to it as the brain science. Like your brain is expecting certain things to happen. Not that the story should be predictable, but there are certain things subconsciously that your reader is going to be happy with or unhappy with. And she's talking about how to get there. So Story Genius by Lisa Cron, definitely on my list. The next book is Shut Up and Write the Book by Jenna Moreci. I have this on ebook. I can't hold it up for you, but I'll put it up here. This book, especially if you're a new writer and you want to get published, particularly if you're looking to be a self-published author, there's so much here. It's basically a starting block for doing all sorts of stuff, like understanding the genres and knowing about different types of point of views, first person, third person, what have you. It's a great starting point to just start off with the craft if you're starting from ground zero. But also if you're in the middle, if you're an intermediary thing, there's something kind of for everybody. You know, there's information about publishing, about formatting, about story beats, right? Jenna Moreci goes into her own story beats that are similar to Jessica Brody's, but there's more of them and they're a little bit more fleshed out, which I think is pretty neat. And it's sort of like a one-shop guide for everything about writing a book and getting it published. And it's a strong book. And I highly recommend it, especially if you're just starting out and you don't know where to go and what to do. You know, there's just a lot there. And the last book is Gentle Writing Advice by Chuck Wendig. It looks a little washed out. Am I getting it in here? Sorry, it's so white. Gentle Writing Advice by Chuck Wendig. This book saved me, actually. I recently did a video on imposter syndrome, which was really analysis paralysis, and I did a video on the sagging middle recently, and I was in this rut, and part of it was because I was reading all these books that I've been talking about in a row and try to jostle things around and incorporate a bunch of stuff that was new, and I just froze. But it was Gentle Writing Advice that really helped me through a lot of it, because the crux of that book is basically screw all that stuff, right? At the end of the day, there's all these rules, you know, don't ever use an adverb, right? Or these rules, you have to do it this way, or this is that, and this genre says that you have to be exactly, you know. And this book is basically like, relax. These are guidelines, right? You can blow some of this stuff off. You can forget some of this stuff. It's okay to just wing it a little bit, to just untether yourself from all these rules. And it was like this weight just came off my shoulders. You know, it was, if you're in a place where you're just not feeling it and you just can't get your groove and you feel like you're being bogged down by the weight of all these rules and guides, and, you know, even this video, right, where, you know, how, you know, I'm adding to the pile of stuff. I don't mean to. I don't want to stress anybody out, right? But if you're feeling it, then this book is a great way to just say, oh, no, I'm going to unplug myself from this bullshit, and I'm going to do what feels right for the story, right? you know what? I'm going to use an adverb because an adverb works good here and I don't care. You know? Sometimes the rules are, you know, bog you down. And gentle writing advice kind of sets you free. So that's a strong recommendation for me too. So what was that? Four books. So 4 books. I recommend them all. I don't know that I would go and get all of them like I did and try to make them all work. I think gentle writing advice works agnostically against all other writing advice books because it's the one that basically tells you to fuck it all and throw out the handbook, which sometimes you need that once in a while. Shut Up and Write the Book is a good one because it doesn't just go into, you know, writing advice. It's more of it's also a reference guide to the craft itself. So it can exist agnostically against things like Stephen King's On Writing and Story Genius and Saves the Cat Rides a Novel, right? So those 2 books I think can sit in any collection of writing craft books without there being too much conflict. And then, you know, Story Genius and Saves the Cat Writes a Novel, you can get both of those, but you may want to check out each of them and see which one works for you. Maybe both, maybe neither. Maybe one or the other, I don't know. But I know that when I read both of them, I was kind of paralyzed with, these are the right beats. Am I doing this right? Should I make a scene card? Should I do this? Suddenly I was bogged down. And that's on me with my particular flavor of process, right? You know, how I solve problems, how I deliver, and that's not on them. Those are fantastic books. I highly recommend both of them, but just be cautious if you try to take on too much of this stuff at once and absorb it all and try to meet the criteria of each one. You may wind up like me. Which is why I recommend Gentle Writing Advice by Chuck Wendig to get you out of that hole if you wind up there. But maybe read it so you don't wind up there in the first place. All right, so that about wraps it up. That's the books I recommend. Another big thank you to A.M. Malloy for putting the idea of this video in my head. Check out her channel for sure. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, please smush that like button. And as always, please subscribe. I post most Thursdays. You can follow me on social media. I am all over the place these days. Links are in the description for all the places that I'm at. I'm very active on Facebook and Threads and Blue Sky these days. You can also sign up for my newsletter, get a free short story, The Mezzanine Speakeasy. It's Lisa Cooper in 1925, caught between a deadly struggle between vampires and federal agents when a vampire bar is raided. And yes, that wraps it up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.